Okay. Hey everyone. So my name's Geoff. I work in the Peter M. and Paula Green Johnson Student Success Center here on campus, which is in the College of Business. But I'm a career advisor. I've worked with all majors in the past, so I'm pretty well versed in helping people of different majors and industries find jobs. So I'm here to talk to you about resumes. I'll make sure to talk about some cover letter stuff as well. Yeah, and if you have any specific questions, you can either just chime in, you can pop them in the chat. I'll make sure to be watching that throughout this presentation. So first is about me. So I am, like I said, the career advisor for the College of Business. I meet individually with students for career appointments. Every college has a career advisor or someone that you can go to. So if you want to meet with someone specifically from your college, I can definitely connect you with that person if you're not a business student. If you are a business student, you can reach out to me directly and we can set up an appointment. I also give career presentations and I help plan career events such as job fairs and different workshops such as this. So today we're going to be talking about resume sections and contents, bullet points, resume formats, and reference sections. And like I said, I'll make sure to cover letters, and I'll also talk about more about how to format your references a little more in depth than what the presentation is probably going to have. So this is my little disclaimer. So resumes are living documents. You should be revising them every so often. When you're searching, I recommend revising them probably once every couple months, every couple weeks, especially if you're preparing to move to a new position. If you're a senior in college, you should be reviewing your resume pretty often, getting as much advice as you can on it. Have as many people look at it as possible. You can never have too many people look at it. They're also really subjective. So, for example, things that I might like about resumes, another career advisor might not really care for. So that's exactly why you should start developing your own opinions about what you like about your resume and getting as many opinions as you can so you could pick which ones that you like the most. And you don't have to have your resume look identical to what you're going to see in this presentation. It's okay to be different. It's okay for your resume to not look, quote, perfect. So this is my little thing. So I think that when you look at a resume, the industry you're going into is going to have a huge influence of what it's going to look like. So I've come up with 3 different ones. So there's professional tradition. Those ones, resumes tend to need to look really professional. They need to look really clean. They need to look really just straight to the point content-wise. So those would be like accounting, law, engineering, medicine. And then if you're working for a company that's like really old or really large structure-wise, I call that a baby boomer company. It tends to be ones that those baby boomers tend to be the ones running the company. And those are the people that they're really trying to attract. Then there's creative freedom, which those resumes might look more, you might want to show your creative side off on this, especially if you're going into like graphic design or art. For theater, you might want to put different performances you've done and different roles you've been in those performances. Entrepreneurship, you might want to try to attract those companies' eyes because entrepreneurs tend to be really like easily bored, if that makes sense. So they want to like be razzle dazzled is how I say it. Just like you need to make them notice you somehow. And the middle ground are ones where you have a mix of both. So that could be like sales, where with sales you might want to include like, a picture of yourself. Education is one where, you don't want it to look too like fun and engaging, but you also don't want it to be really boring because in education, you're trying to incorporate a lot of different like learning styles and different just ways of understanding. I also put music on this one. So for music, you don't want it to be too, like, I don't want to say outrageous, but you don't want it to be too fancy. But also you want to make sure that you're covering, different instruments that maybe pieces that you've composed, things like that. So So what do you know about resumes? So for the two people, you can either say out loud or you can just use the hand raise feature. Who has a resume, even if it's not great?
I have, but it's like my academic resume, and it's a kind of like plain, just as you said in the professional category, falls over there, just bullet points and my like the mentions of my degrees, the paper I have published, or my GRE, TOEFL scores, those kind of stuff. Like just the basic information, 2 page. Like first it has like my personal information, and then in the bullet points like my academic relevant degrees, my BSc and my master's.
Mhm. So that sounds kind of like you have a CV. So
Okay,
like
gotcha.
yeah, CVs are very similar to resumes, but like you said, they're more for academics. So a
Okay.
lot of times faculty members will have a CV, or someone who wants to go into a research heavy industry, because you need to produce, like, show that you can write papers and you need to show that you can publish research. So yeah, but that is still yards above a resume in my opinion. I think it's a lot harder to create a CV.
Okay.
So has anyone ever met anyone from a career center here or elsewhere?
At UW, no. I was thinking of meeting Ann Jones, but I still haven't
Mhm.
like managed to, you know, set up a meeting or anything yet. That's why I chimed into this seminar.
Yeah, Ann Jones is really good. So I would recommend even after this meeting with her. So, okay. And then would you submit your resume right now to an employer?
The academic one that I have, probably not.
Okay,
Like I have to make some changes on it. That's why I'm here.
awesome. Well, hopefully you'll get what you want answered.
Yeah, sure.
And if not, you can ask it and I'll answer for sure.
Well,
Okay. So, common resume sections. So, to me, there's three required sections on a resume: the header slash contact information. So, that's going to be your name at the top, along with just like, your email address, your phone number, possibly your address if you choose like a LinkedIn link if you have one as well. Your education, which is going to be the different degrees you have and when you obtained those, or if they're currently in progress, when you are expecting to obtain those, and then any work or related experience. So, yeah, so, and then there are a bunch of optional sections. So these are sections that you can throw in to help bulk up your resume, but they're by no means required. One that I think is oftentimes thought of as required is an objective statement. To me, that's just not super necessary. And I think that they're oftentimes not done correctly. I'll go over what one will look like um, that I would recommend. Like if you want to include a section on leadership, any activities, service honors. Honors are more like awards. So if you've received like a prestigious scholarship, or if you've received like a university or college wide award, that would go under honors. Service is like volunteer work. And then another section is skills. And I have a lot of opinions about skills sections. I think that, for example, with engineering, there's a lot of skills that you gain in engineering. So, like, if you like are a computer science major, for example, and you can code in C++, that's a skill that you should put in the skills section. Or if you can speak Mandarin, that's another thing you could put in the skills section. But things that I would avoid putting in the skill section are things like leadership and prompts, like being on time, and just ones that you can't really necessarily like say, demonstrate, yes, I do have this skill. So like, if I put I can code in C++ and someone's like, okay, do it, I can do it. But if I say that I have leadership skills, it's one that they can't really be like, okay, do it. So what you should do is demonstrate your leadership within your other sections and present that in examples in your interview. And then if you're in a research heavy major, that's another place where I would recommend um, just putting down different research experiences you've had, different papers you've written. Make sure to include the faculty member if you did research with a faculty member, and then any project names. So even if you're assisting them on a project, you can put that you're a research assistant for Dr. Smith in the biology department. And then this is what Dr. Smith's project was called. And then maybe a couple of things that you did for it. For me specifically, I was a science major in undergrad. So I went more of the policy route though with it on how to inform policy around climate change. So I worked with a communications professor to help um, figure out what people are talking about in other countries that are more likely to be impacted by rising sea levels and how they're communicating that to the citizens of those countries, their policies that are informing those decisions. So we looked at countries like the Marshall Islands and Tuvalu, and there's one other. I don't remember what it was, but so I did research for that, and it was part of a UN project. So on my resume, I have that I worked with the faculty member on the UN Climate Capacity Project. So, and then I write a couple of things I did for that project. So that's just a brief overview. I promise I'll go more in depth on the required sections. Let's see. Okay, headers. So this is a kind of bulky page, but the required components are your name, a phone number, and an email address. The email address is one that I would be really careful with. So if you're going to use your Wyoming, University of Wyoming email address, make sure that you're prepared to check it after you graduate. So that's why I recommend just using a personal email address. But using a university one's totally fine. You're just going to have to be aware that if you don't have a job at graduation, which we all hope you do, everyone wants one, and I hope everyone gets one, but that's just not always the case. So you'll just need to make sure that you're continuing to check that, because if you apply for a job today and you might not hear back until like May or June, or they may be communicating with you about the process, you'll just need to be continuing to check that email. So if you kind of wanted to ditch that email when you graduate, make sure to include a different one on your resume. So some optional components are your address. So this is like your physical address. This is a thing that I disagree with some other career advisors on. I think that including an address in a header is a thing of the past, because when people would send mail back, before the internet was really a thing, that's the primary way that they'd contact you about interviews, or they'd send you some like a packet of information, things like that. So they would need your physical address, and now they just have an email address that they could do that with. I personally just put Laramie, Wyoming on my resume. I don't include my actual street address. And then a LinkedIn URL. For LinkedIn, make sure that if you're going to include the URL, that you customize the URL, which I could come back and do a whole thing on LinkedIn if you guys are really interested in that, because I don't go a ton into that here. But also make sure that your LinkedIn's complete. So like you have a picture on there and you at least have sections filled out. And then pronouns. So pronouns are a bigger deal in the United States than in some other parts of the world. So, but also just be aware that that's a way for a company to assume your gender, and that just could potentially lead to discrimination. So it's really up to you. So a question I get a lot of actually about headers, specifically from international students, is should I include like how like a pronunciation of my name, or if my name is actually this, but I actually go by this name, do I need to put that in my header? And the answer is it's up to you. So for me, I go by Geoff in almost every instance of my life, but my name's actually Jeffrey. And I don't put that on my resume just because I don't really anticipate people that were calling me that. So That's my answer for that. And then if you put a pronunciation, that's also your personal choice. Uh, to me, I think that, um, like I said, that can also lead to discrimination in different ways. There's a lot of ways that resumes can cause and lead to discrimination. I'll get into that later in this, but it's just basically your personal preference. And then one of the other questions that I get a lot is, can I put a personal logo or other design element in the header? And my answer to that is, if your industry is more creative and more like lenient and I would say younger in a way, like for example, if you're going to apply to Apple, um, they might be okay with you putting a logo on your resume. If you're applying to a marketing position, 100% put a logo or other design element in the header. If you're applying to become an accountant, if you're applying to work for like a bank, or if you're going to work for like an oil company, I wouldn't recommend that. Um, just because they'll view it as flashy and unnecessary. So, um, and that also goes for a picture. A picture can lead to a lot of things. That can lead to discrimination based off of your appearance. It can kind of distract the person who's reading the resume because they'll immediately be drawn to the picture on the resume rather than the actual content of the resume. And then if they have unconscious bias or maybe direct bias where they're, they might be like, this person just like a quick little thing of them being like, this person might be different than me and I don't know if I want them to work here. So I would avoid pictures as well. Unless you're going into like modeling, then you have to have a picture. But I'm assuming most people here are probably going for that. So I've included a couple examples of headers that I've created. I personally use Quentin ? As my header on my resume, but all three of these are perfectly fine. I think the two on the left, so Quentin ? And Betty Business, are the better ones. Cody Career, that one, because it goes up and down, takes up more space. So, but it also is a good header as well. Okay, the education section. So it should go first on your resume if you have less than 3 to 5 years of professional experience after the header. So if you have about 3 to 5 years of professional experience, your experience will then trump your or be more than your education experience, and it'll be the thing that really sells you to a company. So that will bump it up. But for most college students, the education section will come next. If you have more than one degree, like I do, it should go reverse chronological. So your newest first or your highest degree. If you go from a bachelor's to a master's back to a bachelor's, I would put the master's on top. So doesn't tend to be the case for most people. So let's see. Okay, so then only include your high school if you're in your first year or two of college. A lot of people will put their high school experiences on here. And I don't think that that's really necessary because college is going to be your higher degree. That also goes for an associate's degree. I have an associate's degree myself, which is from a community college. And that degree isn't necessarily, it's just a general like transfer degree. So it's not super applicable to the industry I'm going into. And I have a master's degree. So, I put my master's and my bachelor on my resume. You need to list the entire name of your degree. So you need to write out Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts in whatever your field is. So you shouldn't say like BS in accounting or, a BA in English. List the whole degree. And GPA is optional. Our employer relations coordinator for the College of Business and I were talking today, and she was telling me how companies aren't really caring about GPA anymore, particularly business ones. I can't necessarily speak about all industries. I know agriculture doesn't really care that much. Education doesn't really care that much. Engineering might. But to me, don't put your GPA on the resume unless the job specifically wants a GPA. That's just my opinion, because it's a way for them to rank you. And I personally don't agree with it. I had a good-ish GPA. It wasn't great. I had about a 3.07 in undergrad, and that would immediately rank me within their system as, either being more competent or more intelligent, when that might not necessarily be the case, because we all know that GPA doesn't necessarily reflect your knowledge. So sometimes it doesn't. Okay. So here's two examples of education. So one thing that's really important is if you are in engineering, you need to put the program that you graduated from is an ABET accredited program. That is something Ann Jones very, very, very much stressed to me when she was talking to me about this, to make sure to include that. If you are not from an engineering program, you don't need to worry about that. But essentially, you'll list the university, the location, when you got your degree or when you're expecting to get your degree, some GPA, things like that. If you got a double degree, you can list it like this bottom one here. I don't know if you can all see my mouse. Hopefully you can. And just listing out the entire degree. The Bachelor of Science in Earth Science is the one that I got in undergrad. That's why I put it there. I'm plugging that. So yeah, does anyone have any questions so far? I feel like I'm kind of going through this, and I want to make sure I cover what you all want.
Could you just real quick over again the ABET accredited program? That's specifically for engineers.
Yes, that's specifically for engineers. So anyone in the College of Engineering and Applied Science, you'll want to put ABET accredited program at the bottom of your education section. I'll include an example resume that Ann Jones sent later that will show that kind of go in action on the resume. But if you're not in the College of Engineering and Applied Science, you don't need to worry about that. Okay. So work experience. So this is reverse chronological. So you want the newest to be first. The things that you want to include are the company name, your position title, even if it was, cashier or student worker, and then the dates worked and the location. So the location is particularly important when it comes to, big chain companies. So like if I worked at a McDonald's and, I was a cashier for McDonald's and I just put that there, they might not have a ton of context about that. So if I put that I worked at the McDonald's in Laramie, then it just kind of tells them, okay, so you didn't work at the McDonald's here, you worked at the McDonald's in Laramie. So including 3 to 5 bullets on your job duties. I'll cover bullets later. And then you can call your header work experience, job experience, professional experience. There's a lot of different ways to describe it. This is one of the places where you kind of pick your personal preference. I personally use career services experience because that's the industry that I'm in. So you can put like engineering experience, you can make it education experience. If you're going into education, that would be confusing if you did it for any other industry. So related experience is more of a section that you would put if like you're working in your first role as a professional after graduation. So you only have that really one experience and you didn't do a ton of internships or work experience that was super applicable to the job that you have. So then you can have a related experience section that has like your McDonald's and your student worker position, just things like that. And one other thing that I didn't include on this is I think like certain roles that are unpaid can go under work experience if they're super applicable. So an example is that I was on student government when I was an undergrad. I was one of the, I was like the marketing person for them. So it was a volunteer position. So I put that under work experience still because I don't have a leadership section on my resume. And I did a lot of work for it. It was a 10-hour a week job. It was just unpaid. So just because it's unpaid doesn't mean it doesn't belong in work experience. So these are just two examples. They're both business because I work in the College of Business, examples of how you can lay it out. They're really, really similar because there's not a ton of ways that you can really mess with them. But one thing to note is if you have done like a senior capstone project, written a thesis, things like that, make sure to include those on your resume. So especially if you have written like an honors thesis, you can put that either underneath your honors minor, where that you would list under education, and just list like the title, kind of like a citation. And if you've done a senior capstone project, you'll want to include that under work experience. And I'll have an example of that in a resume I'll show you later. So moving on. So I'm gonna cover skills really quick. I want to make sure to save like 15 minutes for questions. So I'm just gonna kind of breeze through skills. So if you have more questions about skills, feel free to ask them later. So skills are really important, and you should be putting them on your resume if they are like very specific to your industry. So if you have a skill in like a software, if you have a skill in like, you speak another language, like I said earlier, if you're licensed to do something, so if you're licensed to operate heavy machinery, for example, that's something you could put under a skill section. If not, if a lot of your skills are like problem solving or, initiative, those are ones that you should be displaying when you meet the people. And those are ones that your references should be talking about. I included on the right what employers are looking for in a candidate. So the number one thing they're looking for is problem solving and ability to work on a team. So just make sure that you display this somewhere within your bullets on your resume. I'm going to skip that for now. So like I said before, these are things that you should include, like coding in C++, speaking fluent language other than English, or if you're going to apply outside of the United States, a language, like for example, if you're going to apply to France, they're going to assume that you know French unless the position is specifically English. So you wouldn't need to put speaks fluent French if you're going to apply there. But if you're applying within the United States, they'll assume you know English. So then you'll put other languages that you speak. Okay, the other sections, I already kind of talked about this, so I think I'm going to skip it for now. So formatting a resume, I don't like this slide. I feel like it's a lot of words. So using appropriate fonts, so the ones that I recommend are Georgia, Garamond, Times New Roman, and Sylphane. You just want to make sure that they're non-serif fonts. So serif is, serifs are like the weird little notches that come off of a letter. I don't know how else to describe it. So, okay, the F right here, this is a serif. The F right here, it's hard to explain. You just want to make sure it's a simple font. So like I said, you could just write down these 4 fonts and then just choose whichever one you want. Pick margins to be 0.5 to 1 inch all the way around your resume. Make sure it's consistent. Typically 1 page is recommended. However, if you have really applicable content that takes more than 1 page, go for it. As long as it's applicable, no more than 2. Unless they want more than 2, which is really uncommon. And then for font size, for your name, I would recommend 16 to 18 point. Section headers, so that would be like education and work experience, like literally those words, 12 to 14. And then the text within it is 10 to 12. Make sure it's consistent throughout the resume. So for bullets, I recommend using 2 to 5 bullets per experience. PAR statements is what we in the College of Business use. I'm pretty confident the other career people in the other colleges use it. I'm not 100% sure. If not, you're going to learn something new. So PAR stands for problem, action, and results. So these are the things that you need to incorporate to make a good bullet underneath the work experience. So some good and not good PAR statements, they're also businessy. So a not good one would be invoice filing, because yeah, it tells them kind of what you did, but it doesn't really tell them what you did. So a good one would be developed a new filing system that improved processing time for issuing invoices. So PAR is kind of mixed up here, but the P is a new filing system because that's the problem is we needed one. A is the action, so you developed something. And then the result is it improved processing time for issuing invoices. And then the same for hanging up flyers for Half Acre Recreation Center. So you can turn that into assisted in marketing new fitness classes at Half Acre Recreation Center to increase participation. So a lot of people get hung up on the result part because, for example, with this one, the result's not super obvious. So you can just say the goal is to increase participation with this, even if you don't know if it does. If you do have that specific number, so for example, if you know that you're hanging up those flyers, increase participation by like 4%, you can actually say that. You can say increase participation by 4%. So if you're able to quantify, do it. If not, no worries. I'm gonna do this one here, and then I'm gonna skip the next example for the sake of time. So the problem is attendance is low at the farmer's market. So your action is you're going to create social media content to be posted on the town's social media channels. The result is the attendance to the farmer's market was increased by 15%. So then for the PAR statement for that is you design social media content to promote attendance of the Laramie Farmers Market, which increased attendance by 15%. So PAR statements are really helpful. They describe a lot of basically what you do. So just think of that. Some people think that what they did is too boring or basic to develop a PAR statement. Meet with a career advisor if you need help with that, because we can definitely help you with that. I'm gonna skip that one. Okay, so now I'm going to show you an example. So this is the example that the College of Engineering uses. So this is Jane Engineer. So the yellow highlighted section is what Anne really wanted me to show. And for those of you who don't know, Anne is the career associate director in the College of Engineering. So as you can see, Jane Engineer has her phone number and email address, her actual addresses. I think a home and college is optional. Okay. She specifically lists what she's looking for. So this is kind of like her objective statement. Here under education, I'm not a huge fan of this, but this is how the College of Engineering does it. So this is a great piece of that you can talk to with them if you want. So they specifically say that they're a sophomore seeking a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering with a mathematics minor at the University of Wyoming. And then they say that their program is ABET accredited. Their skills, so they say that they have web content management systems, Microsoft Excel. Then they have some work experience. Each one has one bullet. Their accomplishments, and then references available if needed. So this is a great segue to references. So go back to the PowerPoint. References. So most jobs want 3 to 4 references. So make sure to pay attention to any special requests that they have. So sometimes they say one must have been a current or former supervisor. They want a faculty member to be a reference. They might want specific things. So I would recommend not listing them on a resume unless they specifically ask for you to list them on the resume. So a lot of times, especially in the age of virtual applications, they're going to have slots for you to just plug in your references contact information and how you know them. That's how I recommend you to put that in there. If not, I would recommend including an additional page on your resume, so a second or third page, which is just only your references, including how you know them. So if they were a former professor, include that they were a former professor. So this is an example of how you can list out a reference. So Bridget Banker is your reference. She's the finance director at the Bank of Bank. I made that up, very clever. And then I include her contact information, and I then say that she was my former supervisor of 3 years, just so that the person understands that that's how long I've known Bridget and that she used to supervise me. Commonly asked questions, I already answered the picture one, but should I put something on my resume if it discloses a protected class? So a huge example that I think of is if you're part of clubs on campus that might be politically motivated, or um, things like, just like, if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, if you include like clubs that are about that, that's up to you. I would understand that that's grounds for potential discrimination and unconscious bias. So I'd be careful with that, but it is totally up to you. You just kind of need to understand that then it's out in the open. If you put like that you were a student ambassador for, disability services, that might tell them that you have a disability of some sort that you're just not telling them, which you don't have to legally disclose a disability, but that clues them in that you have a disability. So just keep that in mind. If you've only worked a job for a short amount of time, like internships, student worker positions, definitely include them. I think that, especially as a college student, they'll have a lot more grace with that. So just think about that. And can I use a template for my resume? I'd recommend not, because templates are really restrictive. Once you start using a template, and you want to add to the template, it's really hard. Or if you want to remove things from the template, it just makes it look kind of wonky sometimes. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation, 3 minutes before my goal. So that's my contact information if you want to write it down. My office is actually moved. I just moved into my new office yesterday. So it's actually 179 instead of just 79. And then that's the email for the Green Johnson Student Success Center. And I can also get you any contact information of any other college career person if you so want. So with that, I promised I'd talk about cover letters, so I'll talk about that real quick. So cover letters, I like to think of them into 3 different parts. So it's essentially a letter, and typically for professional experiences, you will include a cover letter for every single application you do. So the sections are usually, the first one's an introduction. It's, hi, my name's Geoff. I found this position X, like on your website, and I saw this really cool thing that really sparked my interest in it, and it led me to apply. The next section will probably be about an experience you've had in the past that's relevant to the position. So for example, when I was applying to my current position, I talked about how I had done career advising in my last job as a career advisor. I just moved positions at new school. And then I talked about specific examples of times I've interacted with people and done things that are listed in the resume. And I did that in a couple bullets, two paragraphs, and then make sure to mention, like, if you haven't worked before, which is totally fine. A lot of students have never had like work experience before. You can include things like, when I'm taking these classes, it's really like I'm connecting with the content, I'm connecting with the experiences I'm doing. I'm a really big fan of, I keep saying coding, or I'm a really big fan of like architecture design, or, dance, and I'm just learning more and more, and it's just making me want to work in this industry more and more. And then your final paragraph, or you should include a paragraph also about why you are applying to this specific job and company. So including things like, I saw on your website that you have a commitment to diversity statement, and that's really similar to my own personal philosophy on diversity. Or you can say, I really like how you do this in the community, or you do research on like medical research, developing vaccines. And I think that that's really honorable, and that's something I want to be involved in. And then your last paragraph should essentially just be like a sentence, and it's like, thank you for reading my letter. Here's an email or phone number that you can contact me at. Thank you. And then you just sign it. So cover letters are really simple. Like I said, I can also come back and talk more specifically about cover letters. I could also help you individually with the cover letter. And then the one most common question is, can I use the same cover letter for multiple jobs? And I say yes and no. The jobs are really similar. Go for it. Just make sure to change all of the content in the cover letter that's specific to that first employer. So like, make sure you get every single mention of that company's name. Make sure you change the why I want to work for that company, because they probably do different things. And make sure you change their contact information. So with that, I think I've covered everything that I was going to. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to either turn on your mic and say something, or you pop it in the chat. Yeah, I have about 15 minutes where I can answer whatever you have.
Can I add one more thing about cover letters? And this
Yes.
is something you probably already cover, and when you have a whole hour to discuss it. What I have found helpful in my past, and what I understand that a lot of employers are doing, oftentimes, like if you applied to the University of Wyoming, for example, your resume and cover letter are not going to go directly. Let's say you're applying for a job in my office. I'm not going to be the first person that looks at your documents. It's going to be human resources. And what I recommend is, when you're looking at job application, look for keywords that they mention. So if they talk about specific skills or tasks, make sure that those keywords get added to the cover letter, because they may have an automatic or a different type of system that's just going to scan to see if those keywords are mentioned. And those people often get priority over people who just sort of talk mostly about themselves and don't mention those keywords. And the keywords could be anything. It could be certain types of coding experience. Maybe they want Python or something. It could be, you have to have a driver's license and be able to drive in the US. In the past, like for this job, I made sure I put a line, I am eligible to drive a car. It's silly things, but because of the number of applications that employers get, they're going to look for ways to make shortcuts to look through cover letters. So my suggestion for you all is to look for what those keywords are in the application, which are often listed as bullet points, and just make sure you try to get as many of those in as you can. And then the other thing I wanted to say about resumes, based on my experience with applications going online, for example, at the University of Wyoming, if there's an online application that asks you to upload the resume and cover letter, there may be sections that ask for references. And I think that's what Geoff was getting to, where if the employer has a part on the application, the online application, for references, then you typically don't have to add it to your resume unless it is specified to do so.
Yep. Both the things that you said were correct. Especially with the keywords thing. They're called ATS, what HR uses, applicant tracking systems. And like Jessie said, they look for keywords. So, if they're going to use certain languages or language, like different words, make sure the words that you use match the exact words that they use in the position description for that specific reason. So, for example, I got denied for a job once. Just HR straight up said, no, you're not qualified, even though I was, because I used the wrong wording. So just make sure you use the correct wording. You can always bring a position description to a career person, and we can help you out as well. Let's see. I'm just gonna stop sharing. Does anyone have any other questions or anything else you want me to talk about?
In like most of the resume templates you usually see online have this one particular format, like two-sided ones, if you know what I'm talking about, like some information on the left, some information like on the right. Are those like standard resume formats?
Are you talking about like templates you find?
Yeah, like are those like do they look professional? Like to me, they don't for some reason. I don't know why.
So one of the things that you need to be careful of is those applicant tracking systems I was talking about might have a hard time reading ones
Okay,
if you have content like on the right and the left and the middle.
okay,
So because it will read from right to left.
yeah,
So when it's doing that, it'll read like all the way across and then it'll go to the next line. And if you have things on the sides, it can kind of mess that up.
yeah.
The most I would probably say you could do is include like maybe your headers for the different sections could be on one side.
Okay,
But beyond that, I probably wouldn't. Like I've seen people who put like their contact information on the right. Um, this is the right. I don't know. Whichever side is the right for you
okay,
is the side that you should probably like. I wouldn't include contact information there. I'd keep it to the top. So
okay, okay. And when I was talking about my CV, like what
mhm,
informations like omitting from that one would turn it into like a resume? Like I have my degrees mentioned there,
mhm,
and like my academic experience, like how long I have worked as a research assistant, those and the personal contact informations, and probably like
mhm.
a link to the paper I've published. So you said like that's more like a CV. So like omitting what stuff would that make a standard resume? Like what
The
information
moment,
you will consider redundant for a resume?
yeah. So one section typically is if you've taught classes or have been a TA.
Okay.
That tends to be a section in CVs.
Okay.
So you can exclude those. A lot of times they'll include, especially like if you've worked in academia, they'll include things like I've been the department chair of the biology department for the past 3 years. You can you can probably exclude all of that kind of thing. Another big difference between a resume and a CV in the United States, they call CVs or resumes are called CVs in Europe, just so you all know.
Oh,
Um, so in Europe, if someone asks for your CV, they're asking for your resume. Um, but is the length. So CVs tend to be just basically as long as you can make them. They could be like 12 pages long because they include everything.
okay.
So resumes, you want to condense it to 1 to 2 pages. So you can definitely include papers you've written in your resume, depending on what field you're going into.
Okay.
You can include research you've done if it's applicable to the industry you're going into.
Okay. And another thing,
Mhm,
this popped up in my head, like when I was going through some
mhm.
resume formats and everything. Like, can I include like my references in the resume, or does that go on a CV?
So, like, are you talking about professional
Yeah,
references?
professional references. Like, if I ask for like a reference for example, uh, take it like I'm going to the industry, but for example, take like I'm putting down one of my UW faculties as a reference. So do
Mhm.
I put that on a resume or does that go on a CV?
In a CV, you would include it. On a resume, you would only include it if they request it.
Okay, okay,
So, a lot of times they'll just have spots on the online application to just type in their contact information.
okay. So resume, I ignore it. The
Yes.
reference. Okay, thanks. And another thing, it's about the references again.
Mhm.
When I include it in a CV, do I just like put it like at the end of the CV in a section, or do I need to keep them on a separate page?
So for a
Reference.
CV, it can go in its own section, like probably close to the bottom.
Okay.
If you want to talk more about CVs, you can contact me or Ann Jones specifically.
Okay.
They're a little more complicated,
Okay.
so
Okay.
but I would love to walk you through it with you if you want.
Okay. Thanks. And this is like my last question. This kind of
Mhm,
relates to the OPT stuff. So I
mhm,
think Jesse might need to chime in. My question exactly is that, like, for example, I have still my OPT in process. So in my resume, do I mention it like OPT status or visa status still in process? something like that. Like, what do I put in there to make it sound professional?
Yeah, I'll let Jessie answer that one.
Yeah.
I don't see the purpose of adding visa status to a resume. This is about
Okay.
your qualifications for a job.
Okay.
Unless the employer asks you to include that on the resume, I
Okay.
would keep that for the interview.
Okay.
You just think of a resume as a very limited amount of physical space. You can only put so much on there. It's
Yeah.
limited real estate, and you
Yeah.
don't want to waste that real estate by putting on things that they're not asking for.
Yeah.
Most and your field, they probably are fine hiring students on OPT, H-1B, whatever it is. So that they're probably already going to be expecting to ask those questions during the interview process.
Yeah.
I personally don't see a point in putting it on the resume or cover letter.
Okay.
Be prepared to answer those questions. So if they ask, do you have work authorization? The answer will be yes. You've applied for OPT and it's pending, or hopefully approved if you applied, back in March or February. So the question of, do you have work authorization? You can say yes, but only answer that. I feel like that question might come up on the online application portion, rather than it would need to be covered on a resume or a cover letter. The other question you want to watch out for is, do you require sponsorship? Sponsorship is pretty much referring to like H-1B, where the employer as the sponsor needs to submit paperwork and pay a bunch of money on your behalf to get an H-1 visa. You are applying for, if let's say you was CPT or OPT, before you graduate or after you graduate, you're not asking for sponsorship. You're just asking for a job. You're still keeping your F1 visa. You're still a student through the University of Wyoming. We have your I-20. So you do not need sponsorship for an internship with CPT, or if you're applying for jobs based on OPT. Sponsorship means the employer is going to have to sponsor you for a visa. And so you would say no to that question of, do you need sponsorship?
Okay. Thanks. I was just like wondering, like I get an interview and I tell them like, okay, I'm an international student. I'm still like waiting for an OPT, and they kind of get discouraged. So that's why I was like wondering if I need to put that on my resume. But your answer makes sense. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah. Any other questions? I have like 2 more minutes.
All right. Well, just to remind everyone, I have recorded this session, so this will go up on the website, the ISS website. So if anyone joined us late, you can catch it later. I hopefully will have it up by next week, so you can go back to our website and catch it. But please share it with your friends, your colleagues, fellow students. And then just remember, we do have another workshop at the end of the week on Friday. The next workshop is about resources on campus. So sometimes you'll hear, for example, Geoff had mentioned Handshake. What is Handshake? There's a bunch of resources that are available to you for free that you may have never heard about. And so the next speaker on Friday is going to talk about those resources, where to find them, and what they do for you. Some are for finding employers. Some are meant to help prepare you for the job market. So please jump onto that session as well.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, Jessie has my contact information, so you can reach out to me, and either I can answer your questions or I could forward you to the person for your specific college that can answer your questions as well. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.